I'm Peter Galison, and this is the Galison Show. Today I'll be discussing my ideas from the CBC radio program, How to Think About Science. My guests today are from the accounting community, and they're here to tell us about the implications of my ideas on accounting theory and practice. And now I'd like to welcome you to the show Dr. Smith to discuss her ideas about how three families of accounting relate to my scientific subcultures.
Hello, and thank you for having me on your show.
It's my pleasure. So, as I discussed on the CBC Ideas program, I believe that any science can be divided into three subcultures: experimentalists, theorists, and instrument makers. These three groups each have their own style of work, their own body of knowledge, and their own forms of evidence. So, is there a similar way in which accounting research can be divided?
Well, accounting research can be divided into three families of theory: inductivism, deductivism, and interpretivism. The way in which each of these approach research is different, as well as the assumptions they make. Inductivists use numbers and scientific method to determine how accounting numbers affect decisions. Deductivists use closed logic and math, and interpretists are more concerned with meaning and experience.
As I mentioned in my program, the scientific subcultures don't always speak the same language as each other, making communication difficult. Is this a similar problem faced in accounting research?
Well, it's not so much a problem about language that makes communication difficult, but a refusal of the dominant accounting institutions to consider theories that don't comply with their prescription, or that deviate from the inductivist point of view, which is currently the dominant theory behind the research.
Well, that's too bad. It sounds like the profession and society are losing out because without looking at the story from different sides, the best solution can't be found. Like I mentioned in my program, we need to find a way to work together to achieve our common goals. In your case, it would be to find the best accounting practices.
I agree. Well, thank you for having me on your show to share my ideas, Dr. Galison.
No, thank you. It's always interesting to hear how their disciplines interact within their own communities. And our next guest is Dr. Gray, who is terrified of change in the science world and any other change at all.
Dr. Galison, change is a terrible thing. Why would anyone want change? If something is working just fine now, and everyone is comfortable with it, what is the point of change?
Well, science has always been changing. This is how we got subcultures of science like biochemistry. Biology and chemistry started using certain terms and equipment to interact with each other. So, this was a combination of morphing of science, yet it was still change. Enabling two different areas of science to be able to communicate and create new ideas is a way for us to broaden our knowledge and even more. Even a pure science, such as physics, has changed from mixed maths and geometry. Are you trying to say that science would be better off without these changes? There must be changes in accounting world that are good.
I suppose changes like these can be seen in the accounting world. Large firms, which before had only been auditing companies, expanded into consultation. These firms realized that they were discovering problems in the companies they were auditing and could make money off helping corporations fix these problems. This allowed the accounting world to morph a bit and move into a different direction. Accounting bodies, like science, have changed in the past. From the AISG of the 1960s through to the IASC, IFAC, and IOSCO of the 1970s to the current IASB. IFRS is allowing the world to become more globalized.
Exactly.
But why all this change? Why is science combining different bodies which are currently able to do research on their own? Why change to a single standard which is used around the world?
Like I said before, science is forced into changing because we are always gaining more knowledge and learning better and new ways of doing things and embarking on research. Theory and experiment have worked to make new practices and new types of sciences. Those changes have been good. We have been able to see the melding of different ways of thought. Like science, accounting needs to move forward as newer and better ways are discovered. Like you mentioned, IFRS allows for consistency among nations. IFRS also allows accountants around the world to communicate with each other and account for items the same way. If you can realize that science has always been changing and reforming, this should make you calmer and less anxious about change.
Dr. Galison, thank you very much for dissipating some of my fears. I did not realize that science has always been changing. Now I will work on my anxiety issues.
You are very welcome. So now I'd like to introduce Dr. Brown, who teaches accounting theory in the University of Alberta.
Thank you, Peter. It's a pleasure to be here.
So, Doctor, as you know, there has historically been a separation between pure and applied sciences. However, my belief is that pure and applied scientists can communicate without agreeing on meaning. Do you think this idea can be used in accounting?
Yes and no. On one hand, theorists and practitioners cannot communicate without agreeing on meaning, because accounting is not something found in nature. Accounting only exists because we ascribe meaning to it. So if we do not agree on the meaning of a concept, then we may not be able to communicate at all. On the other hand, we might be able to communicate because accounting theory, for the most part, has been formulated after accounting practice.
So, in general, you think there is no clear-cut answers to this question. Very interesting. My next question is whether or not you think it is useful or important to separate pure and applied disciplines. In science, this is a debated issue, but I think that this is not the right issue to be debating about anymore.
Again, I think this question could be answered with both a yes and a no. The separation of theory and practice could be useful because once we have a solid theory of accounting, it will reduce the need for regulation and help to explain accounting better. Conversely, some might say we should not separate theory and practice. We can use conceptual frameworks which combine some elements of theory and some of practice. Another argument on this side may be that a theorist, too segregated from the practical side of accounting, may come up with ideas that are not applicable to practiced accounting.
I must say, your ideas are fascinating. I may have to start a career in accounting research. Thank you for joining us today, Doctor. And now please welcome to the stage Professor Green from Vancouver, Canada. Professor Green is an accounting academic whose research specializes in the study of objectivity. He is here today to speak about his beliefs on objectivity as a virtue or vice in the accounting world.
Thank you for the introduction, Dr. Galison. I have recently studied your book, Objectivity, and I believe that many of your ideas have strong connections with accounting. Like science, accounting too has changing virtues throughout its history.
Really? I find that quite fascinating. In science, prior to the 19th century, scientists developed a scientific atlas whose goal was to idealize the things that they were representing. This involved scientists to intervene as much as possible in order to represent the true forms of things behind the variations. Is there any evidence of this in accounting?
Why, yes, I think that this idea is closely related to the ideals of positive accounting theory. While accountants in this school of thought believe that they are being objective in their practices, they are really doing quite the opposite. Just like the atlas makers, accountants will intervene as much as possible in order to represent what they believe to be the ideal economic value of a company. They do this by choosing accounting policies and techniques that will give them the results they desire.
So, in order to be objective, do you, Professor Green, believe that as an accountant, accounting is a form of representation, a replication?
Well, in a sense, yes. According to positive accounting theory and the capital markets research, there is nothing wrong with the notion of accounting that is just a record of a company's reality. Financial statements are a snapshot of the company's performance. However, just like the sciences that you have mentioned previously, it has evolved as well.
What do you mean by that?
Well, I believe that not only does accounting mirror reality, but it does indeed create it as well. It goes from being epistemological realism towards constructivism. Just look at the regulations as an example. It's changed over the years in order to keep the accountants in line.
Well, thank you for sharing your insights today on the Galison Show. I would never have realized how many similarities science and accounting has in respect to objectivity. And now, let's say thanks to all our guests for coming on this show. Dun, 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 the Galison Show.